Welcome. Today is Thursday, April 8th, 2021. This is the ACIM Palm Beach Study Group. We are on page 26 in the text, chapter 2, section 5, paragraph 7. Corrective learning always begins with the awakening of spirit and the turning away from the belief in physical sight. So let's just take that one sentence. Corrective learning, which happens in our mind, always begins with the awakening of spirit, with knowing that you're a spiritual being and that the Holy Spirit dwells within you, and turning away from the belief in physical sight, turning away from the ego, turning away from the ego's perceptions. This often entails fear because you are afraid of what your spiritual sight might show you. I said before that the Holy Spirit cannot see error and is capable only of looking beyond it to the defense of atonement. There is no doubt that this may produce discomfort, yet the discomfort is not the final outcome of the perception. While the Holy Spirit is permitted to look upon the defilement of the altar, he also looks immediately toward the atonement. Nothing he perceives can induce fear. Everything that results from spiritual awareness is merely channelized toward correction. Discomfort is aroused only to bring the need for correction into awareness. Any questions, comments? Well, let's go over it again. So we know that turning away from the physical sight is turning away from the ego. And it does entail fear because remember, we're in the position that we're in because we basically rebelled against God. We thought that we could separate ourselves from God, thus creating the physical world, universe, and the ego world. And so the ego makes us believe that we need to be a fear of God's retribution. And thus all the stories about hellfire and brimstone and God's going to judge you and throw you into hell for all of eternity if you're not a good little boy or girl and pay the church money. Anyway, that's where the fear comes from. Because you're afraid of what your spiritual sight may show you. You're afraid to see the reality of it, that the ego world is just an illusion. It doesn't even exist. And that's very fearful to a lot of people. As a matter of fact, that I have found to be the one, the biggest obstacle to overcome in studying A Course in Miracles is to embrace that idea that we live in an illusion, that it's just a dream, that the ego world we think is so real is not. And so there's fear attached to that idea. I said before that the Holy Spirit cannot see error. The Holy Spirit doesn't even see the ego world and is capable only of looking beyond it to the defense of atonement, looking beyond it to the time when the ego world disappears. There is no doubt that this may produce discomfort, which it does in the ego personality, yet the discomfort is not the final outcome of the perception, because the final outcome is the atonement, is true forgiveness and the undoing of the ego. That's the way that the Course teaches it, the undoing of the ego. That's its language. When the Holy Spirit is permitted to look upon the defilement of the altar, we're the altar, and the defilement, it's kind of strong language, but, the mistakes that we make. He also looks immediately towards the atonement, looks immediately towards forgiveness. Nothing he perceives can induce fear. Nothing the Spirit, there's no fear in the Spirit. Everything that results from spiritual awareness is merely channelized towards correction. So the Spirit will always correct the error. Discomfort is aroused only to bring the need for correction into awareness. If we didn't have those feelings of fear and discomfort, we wouldn't know that there's something wrong. That like is the signal for us. Now, are there any comments or questions?
This kind of reminds me of, I think it was last week, when we talked about how the denial of destructive capability or potential, and how because it is all in ego and all in illusion, that there really is no such thing as destruction. And I think seeing that the sentence, everything that results from spiritual awareness is merely canalized towards correction, it just brings me back to that there's really there's no destruction. It's all to bring it into the light of awareness.
Yes, thank you. The only destruction that can possibly happen is in the ego world, and that's not real. It's just illusion. So on to paragraph 8. The fear of healing arises in the end from an unwillingness to accept unequivocally that healing is necessary. What the physical eye sees is not corrective, nor can error be corrected by any device that can be seen physically. As long as you believe in what your physical sight tells you, your attempts at correction will be misdirected. The real vision is obscured because you cannot endure to see your own defiled altar. But since the altar has been defiled, your state becomes doubly dangerous unless it is perceived. Comments, questions? Well, let's go over it. The fear of healing, in other words, the fear of healing, the fear of dissolving the ego world, arises in the end from an unwillingness to accept unequivocally that healing is necessary. It is necessary that we dissolve the ego, that we undo the ego. It's necessary for our spiritual growth. It's necessary for us to realize enlightenment. What the physical eye sees, what the ego eye sees, is not corrective, nor can error be corrected by any device that can be seen physically, because any device that can be seen physically is a part of the ego world. And the ego world is not going to correct itself. The ego does everything it can to dissuade you from taking corrective action. It doesn't want to heal, it wants to perpetrate itself. The ego has its own agenda, which is to keep you in fear and stop you from moving on into spirit, because when you do, you wind up dissolving or undoing the ego world. So it has its own sense of self-preservation. As long as you believe in what your physical sight tells you, as long as you believe in the ego, your attempts at correction will be misdirected. The real vision is obscured because you cannot endure to see your own defiled altar. Well, that, it's metaphorically speaking. The defiled altar is your imperfect ego self that you created and put yourself into. And that's not a pretty sight, which is why girls put makeup on. Anyway, but since the altar has been defiled, your state becomes doubly dangerous unless it is perceived. You can't correct it until it's perceived. Any comments, questions?
I'm sorry, John. I'm going to have a hard time letting that, which is why women put makeup on, comment.
I know. It was a bad joke. I apologize.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for saying it was a bad joke.
It was. I just, I can't. My ego tongue just made me do it.
Because that really is talking about internal, right?
Yes, it is. It is.
Okay.
Yes.
And besides, we're all so beautiful. We don't need makeup. Thank you.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Okay. Yes.
When I was reading and listening to that, I felt that the fear of healing, I feel like it's a very tricky thing, because it's easy to to think of fear as like scary, but I think oftentimes the fear of healing is more subtle. Sometimes I feel like it comes up as like a resistance, or it comes up like, oh, I'm a nice person, I'm going to apologize, or maybe it comes off as a desire to do the right thing, and it's like, I feel like the fear of healing, in order to preserve the kind of the selfish nature of the ego, is not as simple as recognizing it as a fear, but it can actually be disguised in a lot of other emotions. And so I thought that was really interesting, because it's very tricky, very subtle things. So just something that came to mind.
Yes, I agree with you. The fear is the underlying emotion, but it can take all types of subtleties also. And a lot of it has to do with who's doing the perception. So it's somebody who's already spiritually advanced, that already has these types of concepts in their mind, are not going to feel the fear like somebody who's in total denial and really believes in the hellfire and brimstone and all of that, So there's a variation depending on the individual, and there's also a variation depending on the degree of the emotion and and also the degree of the perception. I mean, some perceptions are very vivid, others are much more subtle. And so, yeah. Again, the book is basically talking in absolutes, to get the idea across. It's not going to deal with all of the subtle variations of possibilities that you have to do for yourself. And again, what we're reading is written in ego language. Spirit doesn't use language. If you're in a place where you truly have a spiritual revolution, a spiritual revelation, like people who really can meditate and get into a higher state of consciousness and they have a spiritual revelation, they don't hear words. They know. It's just a knowing. It's an understanding. It can be in every language, any language, no language. It's not words. It's a complete and total knowing, understanding. So what we're dealing with here is the attempt of Spirit to translate that total knowing and understanding into English words in the ego world so that we have a tool to work with to try to get ourselves to that state where we can know and understand spiritually. So we have to work with the words that we're given. Does that make sense? I think we're on paragraph 9. Healing is an ability that developed after the separation, before which it was unnecessary. Like all aspects of the belief in space and time, it is temporary. However, as long as time persists, healing is needed as a means of protection. This is because healing rests on charity, and charity is a way of perceiving the perfection of another, even if you cannot perceive it in yourself. Most of the loftier concepts of which you are capable now are time dependent. Charity is really a weaker reflection of a much more powerful love encompassment that is far beyond any form of charity you can conceive of as yet. Charity is essential to right-mindedness in the limited sense in which it can now be attained. Is that self-explanatory, or do you want me to go over that? Let's see your rereading. Let's go on to number 10 because it follows the same line. Charity is a way of looking at another as if he had already gone far beyond his actual accomplishments in time. Since his own thinking is faulty, he cannot see the atonement for himself, or he would have no need of charity. The charity that is accorded him is both an acknowledgement that he needs help and a recognition that he will accept it. Both of these perceptions clearly implied their dependence on time, making it apparent that charity still lies within the limitations of this world. I said before that only revelation transcends time. The miracle, as an expression of charity, can only shorten it. It must be understood, however, that whenever you offer a miracle to another, you are shortening the suffering of both of you. This corrects retroactively as well as progressively. I guess I'd sum that up to say that true spiritual love is like not something that we can experience in the ego world. Like the best we can do is charity. And healing is also something that only happened after the separation, because healing wasn't necessary before the separation. We were created perfect. And before the separation, we understood our perfection. Why we ever thought that we could separate ourselves from God is really beyond me. But we did. So the healing persists only as long as time persists, only as long as the ego persists. So going to the end here of paragraph 10, only revelation transcends time. I was just speaking of that. The miracle as an expression of charity, as an expression of love as we know it here, can only shorten it. And this is a very big concept in the Course, that we can shorten the time. Well, we don't shorten the time. Spirit shortens the time. It literally collapses time. So you got this timeline. You're here, you're going along, and you're going along, and eventually you reach, eureka, you reach enlightenment. But that timeline doesn't have to be as long as it is at the present moment. Because by offering the miracle of forgiveness, you can shorten that time. You can allow Spirit to shorten that time. Every time you forgive, every time you work the miracle, Spirit is shortening that time and bringing you closer in the timeline to the state of transcendence. It must be understood, however, that whenever you offer a miracle to another, you are shortening the suffering of both of you. You're shortening your suffering. You're also shortening the other person's suffering. You're bringing them closer to the enlightenment because there's only one of us. Whatever you do to the other, you do unto yourself. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. But another way of saying that is, whatever you do unto others, you do unto yourself. And that works both ways. So this corrects retroactively as well as progressively. So in other words, there's something that happened in your past with somebody who has since died, but you think about it in your mind and you offer forgiveness to that person. You offer the miracle to that person. By doing that, you're shortening their time and your time. So if it's done in the present, that's what they mean by progressively. But if it's something that happened in the past that you're forgiving, then it's retroactively. So spirit doesn't care which way you go. It doesn't say, oh, well, you made that mistake in the past. Too bad. You'll have to live with it. We'll only take care of things that you do from now on. No, spirit doesn't say that. Spirit says, whatever you did, whenever you did, if you can forgive it, we accept that as a miracle and we take the appropriate action. Yes, Helena.
I had just a slightly different interpretation, just a way that I was looking at that last sentence. This corrects retroactively as well as progressively. I understand what you're saying. Forgiveness can be retroactive or progressive. But I guess when I first heard you read that, I was thinking of actually forgiving another individual and how, when there's a forgiveness that's shared between people, it seems to erase whatever took place in the past, but it also puts you on a whole different level moving forward and enhances a relationship. So in a way, I guess forgiveness is able to erase time because it's affecting things that occurred in the past as well as things that are yet to occur. That's cool.
And you're absolutely right. And that is a valid understanding of what's being said. Yes. Again, in this world of duality, we can have things mean more than one thing at the same time. But it's basically the same thing, yes, because the forgiveness does erase it. And then it does change the timeline for both of the people. And you're right. That's why people do have those experiences. People who, come to an understanding that, okay, he did this, she did this, but I did this too, and so let's bury the hatchet. And where before you weren't speaking to each other, but you took the initiative to instigate forgiveness and understanding and charity. And then it was erased because it was really true that you were offering this, and they truly accepted it and supposedly offered it back to you. And then you can go on like it never happened. And I'm sure that's happened to everybody of any spiritual awareness at all in their life. Hopefully it's happened to you. It's happened to me. Anyone else? Well, we have a special chapter now. A chapter A, Special Principles of Miracle Workers. One, the miracle abolishes the need for lower order concerns. Since it is an out of pattern time interval, the ordinary considerations of time and space do not apply. When you perform a miracle, I will arrange both time and space to adjust it. We were just talking about that. 2, a clear distinction between what is created and what is made is essential. All forms of healing rest on this fundamental correction in level perception. Well, what is created is of spirit. What is made is of us and ego. So there's a clear distinction. 3, never confuse right and wrong mindfulness. Responding to any form of error with anything except the desire to heal is an expression of this confusion. Anyone have any thoughts about that one? Well, yes? No?
I was moving my hand, but I guess I actually was thinking of something too, that it reminds me of what we talked about earlier, how this, you can't heal ego with more talk or more justification, that you need to be willing to see, because anything other than that is just denial.
Very good. Yeah. Never confuse right and wrong mindfulness. 4, the miracle is always a denial of this error and an affirmation of the truth. Only right-mindedness can correct in a way that has any real effect. Pragmatically, what has no real effect has no real existence. Its effect then is emptiness. Being without substantial content, it lends itself to projection. So again, we can't, only spirit can correct and heal, only right-mindedness. And anything we try to do in the ego, with the ego, is just going to lead to, well, nothingness, just an empty projection. 5, the level adjustment power of the miracle includes the right perception for healing. Until this has occurred, healing cannot be understood. Forgiveness is an empty gesture unless it entails correction. Without this, it is essentially judgmental rather than healing. Anyone?
This really does remind me of all those times when someone attempted to forgive and it just was insincere, and you just recognize that that's not forgiveness. It's not from the heart. It's not from the spirit, if you will. It's simply words being said by the ego.
Right. The big difference here is that when the ego forgives, what it's saying is, I forgive you for the terrible things that you did to me. So the ego is thinking, you did terrible things to me. But being the kind, generous person I am, I'm going to forgive you. I won't forget, but I'll forgive you. Whereas Spirit is saying, I forgive you because you did nothing wrong. You never did anything wrong to me at all. You are completely innocent, and I'm acknowledging your complete and total innocence because you are a son of God. You were created perfect. You were created innocent. And whatever you did, whatever ego thinks you did, happened in the ego world, and that's just a dream. That's just an illusion. That never even really happened. So I don't need to forgive you for that. My forgiveness is based on that you're totally innocent. When you can do that while still in the ego world, that's a miracle. I think we're on number 6. Am I right? Okay. Miracle-minded forgiveness is only correction. It has no element of judgment at all. The statement, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, in no way evaluates what they do. It is an appeal to God to heal their minds. There is no reference to the outcome of the error. That does not matter. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do is the same as saying, Father, forgive them. Everything they're doing is in the ego world and it's not real. And they don't know that they're completely innocent. They don't understand that they're spiritual beings. If they did, they wouldn't even be doing these things, whether in the ego world or not. Seven, the injunction, be of one mind, is the statement for revelation readiness. My request, do this in remembrance of me, is the appeal for cooperation from miracle workers. The two statements are not in the same order of reality. Only the latter involves an awareness of time, since to remember is to recall the past in the present. Time is under my direction, but timelessness belongs to God. In time, we exist for and with each other. In timelessness, we coexist with God. So be of one mind, and the doing this in remembrance of me is performing the miracles in remembrance of who you really are, in remembrance of the Spirit. 8, you can undo much on behalf of your own healing and that of others if, in a situation calling for help, you think of it this way. I am here only to be truly helpful. I am here to represent him who sent me. I do not have to worry about what to say or what to do, because he who sent me will direct me. I am content to be wherever he wishes, knowing he goes there with me. I will be healed as I let him teach me to heal. Your assignment for this week, copy those words down on a big poster board and hang it where you're going to see it every day. I have used this over and over and over again. It's absolutely marvelous. Anyone? I'll read it again. I am here only to be truly helpful. I am here to represent him who sent me. I do not have to worry about what to say or what to do, because he who sent me will direct me. I am content to be wherever he wishes, knowing he goes there with me. I will be healed as I let him teach me to heal. Let's take a moment of silence and think upon that for a moment. Thank you, friends. Again, I ask if anyone cares to comment.
It's reminding me of a Bible verse, and I'm not certain that I have it right, but is that, Lord, make me an instrument of thy will? Is that how it goes?
Yeah.
That's a good wake up first thing in the morning, and I imagine this would be too once it's memorized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Well, we have reached the end of section 5. Are we ready to move on, or do you want a break now? How dost thou feel? Thumbs up for moving on. Oh, I guess we're moving on. All righty then. Section 6, fear and conflict. Sounds very ego, doesn't it? Being afraid seems to be involuntary, sometimes beyond your own control. Yet I have said already that only constructive acts should be involuntary. My control can take over everything that does not matter, while my guidance can direct everything that does, if you so choose. Fear cannot be controlled by me, but it can be self-controlled. Fear prevents me from giving you my control. The presence of fear shows that you have raised body thoughts to the level of the mind. This removes them from my control and makes you feel personally responsible for them. This is an obvious confusion of levels. Okay, so the my here is Jesus. Jesus is talking to us. But for those of you who aren't comfortable with Jesus talking to you, then it's Buddha talking to you, okay? It's spirit talking to you. Me is is the Holy Spirit. So basically what it's saying is that Spirit has control over everything that matters, which are spiritual things, but it has no control over the ego things. And if you choose to have fear control you, which is definitely an ego thing, then you're not even allowing Spirit to help you out because you're engaged in fearful thinking. So there's really a discipline here that needs to be achieved of undoing the fearful thoughts. And the best way I have found to do that is to substitute faith for fear. So instead of being afraid, affirm that you have faith and that there's nothing to fear. Otherwise, you'll be caught up in the fear, you'll be caught up in the ego, and then you will be caught up in the confusion of levels. Paragraph 2, I do not foster level confusion, but you must choose to correct it. That's where the decider in our mind is. We have the free will choice. And nobody, especially the Spirit, is forcing us to let go of ego. That's not how Spirit works. We have to decide. We have to make that free will choice for ourselves to decide for Spirit instead of for ego. You must choose to correct it. You would not excuse insane behavior on your part by saying you could not help it. Why should you condone insane thinking? There is a confusion here that you would do well to look at clearly. You may believe that you are responsible for what you do, but not for what you think. The truth is that you are responsible for what you think, because it is only at this level that you can exercise choice. What you do comes from what you think. You cannot separate yourself from the truth by giving autonomy to behavior. This is controlled by me automatically as soon as you place what you think under my guidance. Whenever you are afraid, it is a sure sign that you have allowed your mind to miscreate and have not allowed me to guide it. Anyone? That's pretty strong language. I think it's very clear. I don't think it needs any interpretation. 3, it is pointless to believe that controlling the outcome of misthought can result in healing. When you are fearful, you have chosen wrongly. This is why you feel responsible for it. You must change your mind, not your behavior, and this is a matter of willingness. You do not need guidance except at the mind level. Correction belongs only at the level where change is possible. Change does not mean anything at the symptom level where it cannot work. No matter what you do in the ego world to try to change it, it's not going to work if you're not working on the spiritual level in your mind. If you're not forgiving in your mind to change it, whatever you try to do in the ego world, it's not going to work. Ego can't do that. Ego can't heal itself. Ego can't do miracles. 4, the correction of fear is your responsibility. When you ask for release from fear, you are implying that it is not. You should ask instead for help in the conditions that have brought the fear about. These conditions always entail a willingness to be separate. At that level, you can help it. You are much too tolerant of mind wandering and are passively condoning your mind's miscreations. The particular result does not matter, but the fundamental error does. The correction is always the same. Before you choose to do anything, ask me if your choice is in accord with mine. If you are sure that it is, there will be no fear. Let me say that again. Before you choose to do anything, ask Spirit if your choice is in accord with Spirit. If you are not sure that it is, or if you are sure that it is, there will be no fear. If you're not sure that it is, don't do it. Just don't do it. Any questions? Comments? I'm thinking I've reached the end for tonight, so I'm going to put my marker here on paragraph 5, and that's where we'll pick up next week. So again, before we end tonight's session, there's room for last comments or questions. The floor is open. Okay, then. Thank you all for your participation. And we'll see you next week, I hope.